Right, so as the world watches and waits to see if the United Nations General Assembly acts against Israel following their outlawing and banning of humanitarian aid, courtesy of the United Nations Relief and Works Agency, UNRWA, from Israel and the occupied Palestinian territories, effectively rendering humanitarian aid illegal as that does, as I discussed in a video yesterday on this subject. One option open to the UN that can't be vetoed by the US at the Security Council is to just suspend Israel's membership, which strips them of their right to sit at the General Assembly, to vote, to speak, and to lobby various UN agencies. If they follow this very method, which was used very successfully against South African apartheid, they can even lobby to have them barred from sporting events, political events, and so on and so forth. This would essentially be a boycott, divestment, and sanctions levied on Israel. But we don't have to wait for the UN to make this move to prove it works, as a prime example of this has just dropped a bombshell on Israel's already struggling economy, as they've just lost another big deal. What would have made it been a much-needed multi-million-dollar cash injection, but which has now been arbitrarily cancelled in effect due to BDS, being implemented by another nation already. Israel's economy is tanking fast. They can't afford the war they are embroiled in, let alone anything else. So if you really want to hurt them, hitting them in the pocket like this is the most effective way to go. BDS works. Right, so Israel's economy continues to go from bad to worse, and this news story just happened to drop just after the BDS movement itself just yesterday published an article detailing just what a bad place Israel is in right now due to boycott, divestment and sanctions already in operation in various nations around the world, and has all been supported and promoted under the hashtag #ShutdownNation. A former Israeli government official, Ron Zur, and the former head of Israel's National Economic Council, Eugene Kandel, have both said at the rate things are going, Israel may not be around to celebrate its centenary, envisioning as they are right now a total failure of all economic systems in Israel, and that is just as things stand now, let alone if the UN now take action, an action the US wouldn't be able to stop on their own, all due to crackpot, insane, babyish reactions from Netanyahu, lashing out because things are not going his way, lashing out at the UN as Israel has a long history of, now directly attacking the UN and expecting to get away with it once more, with the US not only shielding them, but effectively financing its war in the Middle East. 70% of the Israel war bill has been picked up by the US tab. US public. Really is no wonder the US are seen as the biggest terrorist state going right now, and I'm sure US taxpayers are loving the fact they're paying for all of this. But Israel's projected economic growth rate this year is predicted to be just 0%, flatlined. They're lucky to not already be in recession already, frankly. Again, they can probably thank the US for that, though. The credit rating agency Standard & Poor's have downgraded Israel's credit rating with a negative outlook, predicting growth of just 1.5% for 2025, but I fancy that'll get revised down again, especially if the UN do suspend Israel's membership with everything that entails. The other big credit ratings agency, Moody's, have dropped Israel 2 notches on their scale amid warnings of another drop possible, which would reduce their credit worthiness to junk status. Further loans, therefore, would come with far higher interest rates. How are things not already negative, I asked a moment ago? Well, some stuff already is. Standard & Poor's coming back to them, they projected investment in Israel to drop to minus 1.5%, so negative investment, operating at a loss position for 2024 by the end of the year, compared to a rate of 1.3% in 2023 and 2.2% in 2022, illustrating the damage this war is directly doing to Israel itself. It is quite simply bad for business. How are Israel trying to address this situation, Damo? Well, underhandedly it seems. Here's an excerpt from the BDS article explaining that. BDS and boycotts have changed Israel's global trade landscape, said Avi Balashnikov, chairman of the Israel Export Institute. He added, "We fight every day, hour by hour, for Israeli industry abroad. Economic boycotts and BDS organizations present major challenges, and in some countries we are forced to operate under the radar." Under the radar? That sounds awfully like we'll operate through several shell companies and make various countries buy our gear unbeknownst to them, doesn't it? Or it's like they've been relabeling their produce as people choose not to buy Israeli by, for example, labeling it as Palestinian perhaps. Dirty tricks rather than changing their ways, seeming to be their preferred option. But BDS works. They admitted that too. They are already suffering, and this latest example of clear-cut boycott, divestment and sanctions has seen them lose a multi-million-dollar deal. The country that has canned this deal on Israel is Spain. Now, Spain have already been very outspoken in their condemnation of Israel, having already joined several other countries this year in formally recognising a Palestinian state. They were the first European state to back the case accusing Israel of genocide at the International Court of Justice. They've been vocal in urging the EU to end its free trade agreement with Israel based on the human rights violations it had committed and continues to commit. Amongst all of this, though, Spain has also suspended all arms sales to Israel. Proportionately small amount of weaponry as that was, but it's still the gesture, isn't it? They've canned it all. But now they've expanded that to weapons purchases from Israel as well, having been worth just shy of $6.5 million to Israel, around €6 million as this deal was. This was a deal between Israeli munitions manufacturer Guardian Limited Israel and the Guardia Civil Police Force in Spain to buy some 15 million 9mm rounds of ammunition. Now obviously the police cannot do deals like this themselves. The deal was initiated by Spain's Interior Ministry, the equivalent of the Home Office. But it's been canned in what is a clear-cut example of BDS being carried out by the Spanish government. You see, the contract for these munitions was put out to tender in February, and it was awarded to this Israeli company only just over a week ago, on the 21st of October. But since then, the Spanish Defence Ministry stepped in and cancelled the deal completely, along with an announcement that Spain has canned every arms purchase from Israel from, rather poignantly, October the 7th of this year. It is in truth, though, just the latest example of capital flight from Israel, and it isn't just coming from certain countries already calling out Israel's atrocity and enacting BDS. For example, Britain's largest private sector pension fund, USS, has sold off some £80 million worth of investment assets of Israeli origin, as its members basically demanded that of them. Nothing to do with Starmer & Co at all. It was just the obvious business decision USS had to make in order not to lose business itself. Another one that has wound up much of its Israeli interest despite its government is US tech giant Oracle, who also dropped investment plans this month, dumping a $250 million deal to invest in an AI data center in Israel. And that is all despite Oracle's big bosses all being fanatically pro-Israel Zionists. That only counts for so much in business, it seems. Whether by incident or design, BDS is proven to work. Fossil fuel companies are pulling out of Israel. Tech companies are pulling out. Investment companies are pulling out. And should the UN itself, in effect, pull out of Israel and then get behind a concerted effort to boycott it too, Israel really does face extinction and the prospect of becoming a failed state. And it will only have its own violence and its own inherent racism to blame for it, its own enactment of genocide. And actually more and more people around the world, as politicians seem stuck to or determined not to act to bring Israel to heel, perhaps this is the logical conclusion to all of this that is happening right now. Given how Israel was created by force and land theft and imperialism as that was, that this is actually the inevitable natural conclusion of that. That instead of a two-state solution that nobody seems prepared to enforce and actually work towards, that a single state that is not the state of Israel anymore is what will inevitably appear. Things like that never happen quietly and peacefully either, though, do they? Food for thought. Meanwhile, whilst the UN is full of condemnation for Israel's blatant attack on UNRWA, the outlawing of humanitarian aid as that amounts to, there very much is an option for them, as alluded to earlier, that will give them a chance to hold Israel accountable without worrying about the US inevitably vetoing it. Get all the details of that option open to the UN in this video recommendation here as your suggested next watch, and I'll hopefully catch you on the next vid. Cheers, folks.